This is the time to stand up now. We can't carry on like this.
Very good evening. Sunday 29th of May, and this is much later than I'd planned, so my apologies. I am in need of a plumber. My boiler's leaked somewhere and dripped all the way downstairs into the poor lad's flat downstairs, so I've had other things to keep me occupied. I've got it stopped, so it could have been worse. So, Samosas on Sunday, episode 3. For those of you who are new, I noticed a couple of you are new. The idea behind Samosas on Sunday was really an interlude whilst I drew breath and gathered some strength, really, and energy before we go into the running towards the all-out 2023 election. So that's where Samosas, a part of where Samosas on Sundays came from. And it was just an idea, really. We take an international story, link it to a national story, and then connect it to a local story. And it provides all of us with an opportunity to just step back, I suppose, and see the bigger picture. Unfortunately, this week we've had various bits of news come out of the Civic Centre, so I will combine it with some other news and reflections as a normal transmission would be. My intentions are that the Samosas on Sundays become a podcast, so they become sound only, really, and they're recorded and they're released, and there's a weekly newsletter or a regular newsletter and the transmission. So there's something coming out every week is my intention. If you find value, by all means, please do like, do share, and if you haven't signed up yet to the newsletter and the webpage and the YouTube channel, please do so. We've just made it all free if you want, so by all means just sign up. And if you are able to, there are paid options, and as always, you can buy me a samosa, buy me a coffee, however you want it. So, 2 years today, George Floyd happened. For those of you who time flies, so George Floyd was this black American who was killed by a police officer. He leaned on his neck, and the famous "I can't breathe," I think his last words were, "Tell my children I love them," I'm dead. And he died. I mean, there were drugs found in his system afterwards. It emerged that he was a criminal for a long time. For most of his adult life, he'd been in and out of trouble with the law. It emerged later he'd been involved in violent crime. There were drugs found in his system afterwards, but that's by the by, I think. I don't think anyone deserved to die the way he did, or anyone like him did. And the fallout from it is really what surprised me, if I'm honest with you, because let's be honest. In the United States of America, someone dying of a violent crime isn't news, is it really? You know, it's not a rare thing. There was 50 odd kids murdered, butchered last week in America. So it's not a rare thing. Sadly, it's not a rare thing. But the reaction, I think the reaction is and was interesting, not just in the United States of America, but the reaction across the world. Because it's ended up that the killing of this man became this massive anti-racist movement across the world. Not my sort of anti-racist movement, before anyone says anything, not mine at all, but it became this anti-racist movement across the world. And it is as though people had already prepared and were waiting for something to come along that they could just throw it all on. And it goes back to this concept called critical race theory. And critical race theory underpins much of the current day thinking on race relations, which is that black people are victims and white people are the oppressors. And that's why you went from an out-of-control police officer with a history of violence towards members of the public, instead of it just being contained as that, it developed a racial dimension. And by the way, the history of the police force in the United States and in that particular area, they're just as likely to kill Latinos, they were just as likely to kill white people. They didn't care. It was just a culture. But it became racialized because people were waiting to make it racialized with the notion, this concept of critical race theory, where white people are racist and you're to pay for the sins of your fathers or your grandfathers or your great-grandfathers or your great-great-great-great-great-grandfathers. Go back as much as you want. And it doesn't matter if whilst black people were slaves, you were also, or to all extents and purposes, your ancestors were also slaves. It doesn't matter. You were privileged and they were not. And they were waiting. And that's why, from that, and you saw all the marches, you saw all the demonstrations, the looting, the violence. It's because from that, we ended up in a place where football players take the knee before each game starts. And we started pulling statues down. Instead of learning from our history, we wanted to whitewash our history. And so we had an American man being killed by a police officer, transforming into a global race, militant race, I don't know what the correct terminology is. But it wasn't the race relations I recognized. Yet we brought it here. And he even came to the town hall. You'll remember Arood Shah with a Black Lives Matters hashtag on her Twitter handle, lit up the Civic Centre purple in tribute on his anniversary last year. And prior to that, Sean Fielding had promised, whilst he was leader of the council, Sean Fielding had promised a review of every statue, every painting, every civic art that we had in the town. It's been nearly two years since that promise, and I'm still waiting to see this report of what we will pull down and what we will hide. Because the fact is, and this is his ignorance, I would imagine, that a town like ours, a cotton town like ours, is built on the backs of the slave trade and slavery from the United States and the cotton picking there. So if you are naive and looking for an argument to fit, you'd jump on it straight away and say, this town, Oldham, has blood on its hands, cotton blood. We should be embarrassed, we should be ashamed, and we need to pay back. Because that's the shame Sean Fielding was talking about when he ordered a review, his council officers to review. And Amanda Chadditon, the new leader of the council, is very much of that school of thought, by the way. Her politics are very much of that persuasion. Racist, misogynist, labelling people without taking the time to understand them. Now, there's a problem with that review and the entire argument to do with Oldham benefiting from the slave trade. I think the facts are for every one Oldhamer that benefited, there were 4 slaves in the background who'd done the work. In many ways, no, I don't mean it disrespectfully, no, I don't. In many ways comparable to, the child labour that Adidas or Puma or Nike or whoever use in Bangladesh, that we all turn a blind eye to when we were in our trainers. Yeah, so in many ways, it's that invisible stuff in the background. But there is something that doesn't quite fit. So at the height of the slave trade, and when we were involved in banning the slave trade, by the way. Mere details, ignore them. And the way we banned the slave trade was we bought every slave out. We paid every slave owner, bought every slave, bought their freedom, and transferred the debt to you and I, and our parents and our grandparents and our great-grandparents, and it was only recently paid off. So actually we are liberators. But no, that wasn't what they instructed. Because it doesn't work that way. The narrative doesn't work that way. Because if the narrative worked that way, and if the history lessons had been taught the way they should have been taught, you would know about the cotton famine. And the cotton famine essentially made tens of thousands of people in our town unemployed. And do you know what emerged from that? Was a period of reflection where working class men and working class women began to compare themselves and their living conditions and their lives to how the slaves, the African American slaves' lives were. And in many ways it was the ambers that led to what became the Chartist movement and the growth of democracy. So we compared ourselves to that. The next thing, which is interesting, and it's historically recorded, that many of your ancestors at the time in this town publicly supported the abolition of slavery, even though it would cause them financial hardship. They came out and spoke about it publicly. And this is why that Muppet, and I'll get to him later, Max Woodvine, and his mate, they're a double act, aren't they? Luke Lancaster, really don't understand the history of our town. There's a bloke called John Platt. John Platt was like one of our mayors, multiple time mayors. He essentially created the town. He was from Dobcross, but he never considered himself just some from Dobcross. He created Oldham. And at one point, the Platt brothers, 40% of the town worked for him. Do you know what happened during the time of the cotton famine? The great and the good in this town from a different era where they didn't draw down allowances and pay themselves pay rises. The great and the good, seeing that people were out of work, created civic projects through which they could work. And do you know what the most famous civic project was in Oldham at the time? It's why John Platt's statue's in there, you idiot, Woodvine. Alexander Park was a civic project. It gave people work to do during the time of the famine. And that's why the statue got moved there. So we stood alongside those who wanted to abolish slavery. We took a hit, a direct hit. We suffered, our ancestors suffered as a consequence of it. And those who led our town, instead of blaming and twisting it, shouldered the responsibility and supported the townsfolk through seeking employment, through massive civic projects, of which Alexander Park was one of them. The history of our town is we are anti-racist, we are abolitionists, and we stood in solidarity. Yet this dickhead went and jumped on the bandwagon of George Floyd, and went and ordered a review of all of our civic works, of which I'm sure Platt's statue would have been one, because a lot of his wealth was built on the trade from the time. So instead of seeing what he did with that, the betterment of the town and the education of the town. So where is this report? My understanding is they're not brave enough to publish it. They're not brave enough to publish it. Because some woke idiot has listed a whole host of things that we need to get rid of. Because this is a self-fulfilling prophecy. Critical race theory. The making fit of race as the, not even the primary factor, as the exclusive factor for why a criminal policeman did what he did. They made it fit and off it went. And all of you who were uncomfortable with it, it wasn't because you were racist. Although some of you did fall into the racist trap of whataboutery. Oh, he was a drug dealer, he was a criminal, he was this. It doesn't matter what he was, he didn't deserve that to happen to him. You all know that. Inside you all know that. So what Dave did, this self-fulfilling prophecy of making race the dominant factor, is that a new generation of young people from across the world, from the taking of the knee of Ev at the football games, the police officers humiliated, forced to take a knee, critiquing what's taking place is not racism. Because what this is doing is fueling racism. And it's creating a new generation of young people. Not just in Oldham, but across the country. Who view themselves as victims, as oppressed. And equally dangerous. A generation of white young people who are told they are privileged when their lives and the adversity and challenges they face are at least as comparable as towards those that they are told they are privileged over. There's only one consequence here. A generation of black kids will grow up victims and self-handicapping because they see themselves as racist, as victims of racism. And a generation of working class white young people in particular who'll grow, sadly, to become racist. Sadly, they will become racist. Because it's easy to judge, isn't it, when it doesn't affect you? It's easy to take the moral high ground when what's took place doesn't affect you. But when they have been repeatedly oppressed, when they themselves are oppressed, they will turn. So, fast forward 2 years. Police chiefs in England are going to apologise, apparently this week or next week, for racism, discrimination and bias in their race plan. Police chiefs will declare they are ashamed, that's the word, ashamed, about racism remaining in law enforcement, and apologise for the discrimination and bias still plaguing forces in a new race plan. It launches this week. Apparently, they're going to commit to becoming institutionally anti-racist. I'm not sure what that means. Maybe they'll put knee pads on their uniform, so every time they see a black lad, they can take the knee. But they're going to become institutionally anti-racist. And they aim to start winning back the confidence of black people. They vowed to end the treatment which black people find stigmatizing and humiliating. Their words, stigmatizing and humiliating. And I'll quote them. Police chiefs will say, "We accept that policing still contains racism, discrimination and bias. We are ashamed of those truths. We apologize for them and we are determined to change them." And this report comes straight out of the mass protests following George Floyd in America, where a police officer killed a black man. Where police officers regularly kill people, black, white, Latino, whatever. You name the combination. An analysis of the failures of the UK police force will show that it equally fails other sections of society. Most definitely fails and discriminates against the working class. Last I looked, was it Sarah Everard? Serving police officer. Who they knew about. Went out with his badge. Looked for a young woman, picked her up, pretending it was some police business, kidnapped her, raped her, and murdered her. Are they ashamed of that and the culture of misogyny? This is a dangerous, self-fulfilling prophecy. Now, of course, there's racism in the police force. But there's many isms in the police force, and incompetence and corruption, I think, would be far higher than racism. But they're fixated with it. The stats appear that because George Floyd was killed in the United States, 250,000 people took to the streets in the United Kingdom with calls for racial justice. That was despite the country being in lockdown. So, the police are to admit that they are ashamed of the way they've treated black people as a direct consequence of the American police killing a black man in the United States, thousands of miles away from here, under circumstances that have absolutely nothing to do with us. So we fast forward to Oldham and this self-fulfilling prophecy. There's a Muppet, and I use that term intentionally. There's a Muppet reporter at the Oldham Times, community reporter, Jack Fifield, or Fifield. I'm not sure how you pronounce his surname. Jack Fifield, if you look at his Twitter account, was kindly sharing with everyone how he has caught an STD, STI, same thing, isn't it? Sexually transmitted infection, an STI, and how he'd recently had sex with 3 different individuals in the lead up to him having this STI. I come from a different generation, I think. of what I feel comfortable sharing. But Jack, from Bristol, by the way, and Bristol's where they dragged that statue down and threw it in the water. Yeah, threw it in the river. Has picked these stats out. And him and a whole host of other fake liberals, this metropolitan elite I make reference to, have been pushing this narrative. And I find myself in a unusual place, because it's as though I'm defending the police, and I'm not defending the police. I am a victim of police oppression, not because I'm black, by the way, but because of my politics. But Jack and his mates are creating this narrative that the police aren't just going after black people, they're going after young people. And there is apparently a surge in police use of force on Oldham's under 18s. Figures suggest a surge in police use of violence. In some cases, police have even drawn CS gas on children younger than 11, despite its use being banned in war. Jack, you muppet. CS gas isn't banned in the United Kingdom, and police are allowed to use it. Now, well, first of all, the bloke never used it. Officer never used it. Secondly, you have no idea of the context in which he drew it. And thirdly, when they use it in war, they usually use it as a strategy before the guns and the grenades go. It's to cause more violence and make it easier. Not used as a deterrent. So Jack is going on with himself. Apparently in 2018, there were just 34 records of force with 11 to 17-year-olds. And in 2021, it's 229. And so far, in 2022, the figure is already doubled that of 2018 at 68. If two police officers are out together, then the figures count double. So that it could be the one same individual and it could be twice. And what exactly is force? They're creating a narrative. The police can't be trusted. If you're black, the police are ashamed. If you're a young person, the police are going to beat you up. Now, of course, I find the use of force on young people alarming, but you know why I find it alarming? I find it alarming because, to me, the alarm bells are respect for the police is at an all-time low. No one I knew when we were that age would dare answer back a police officer, let alone escalate a situation to which a police officer is using force on a child. And just to, give it that gangster movie feel. In Oldham, a child under the age of 11 was red dotted by police with a taser in 2018. For Oldhamers aged 11 to 17, there have been 31 reports of taser use since 2017. So in 5 years, 31 tasers used. What's that, 6 a year? 11 to 17. This isn't the United States. Although if Jack and his and people like him have their way. And the idiots in the charge of the police who are ashamed. This is just a self-fulfilling prophecy. One feeds the other, doesn't it, Julie? The police have created the mistrust, and because there's mistrust amongst the communities towards the police, they're less likely to respect them. Which brings me on to other pressing matters. It's coming up to a year since Aruj Shah's car was firebombed. The police have yet to charge anyone, issue a statement as to what's gone on. And the consequences of what's taken place are being played out in neighbourhoods and communities across Oldham. If someone who blew up the leader of Oldham Council's car can get away with it, well then it's open season, isn't it? And we can do what we want. And that's why arson attacks on cars have gone up. That's why the violence on the streets has gone up, because what young people in particular have looked and found and made up their own minds is if you can get away with it when you attack the most senior person in the town, then no one's going to care what we do to some nobody. So that is the Samosas on Sunday bit. I hope you found value in it. By all means, share, like, buy me a coffee if you want. Sign up to the webpage. I'll just go and fill my drink up, and I'll do a little bit on some of the other issues and some of the other news going on in the town. So if you give me a little while, and I'll go and do that. So those of you who want to stay for the rest, by all means, please do. I think the plan is we're going to do one Recusant 9 transmission a month. Is the plan, Julie. So one a month, and one Samosa on Sunday a month, and probably one sort of newsletter a month. So something more or less once every week is the idea. If in an ideal world, I'd do a transmission every Sunday. It's just not feasible for me at the moment, I'm afraid. In fact, I'll bring it up. I'll let you have a look. Let's see what it looks like. This is my dashboard. You can see for my webpage, the ghost.io. So it's like a blogging page, really, which is where I publish all of my stories the best I can. So we've got 415 members. 104 of those are paid. Some of those are complimentary, so they're not all paid, but yeah, that's how it comes up. And 311 free members. But the interesting stats are I now earn £410 a month. So that's the entirety of what I earn a month, £410. So I'm hoping I can give you value with that. But the interesting thing, and that's not what I actually take, because they take the management fees and all the rest of it out of that before I see it. So I lose about 10% of that. But the best bit, I think, the bit that makes me smile isn't the money bit, it's the bit underneath. See that? The engagement. So 80% of the people who are members have within the last month have read my content. I'm quite chuffed with that. 80% of the 415 and 72%, so 3 out of 4, give or take, within the last 7 days have read my content. So I'm all right with that. I'm doing well. I'll show you the awesome on this. I'll wait till 9 as well, Julie, before I do the next bit, and that way we're for those who join us, they can see that. So that's what I can see. So there's 39 of you viewing right now, but 102 of you are viewing at some point, or have viewed and come back and stuff like that. So that's what I see at my other end. No, mate, it's a bit more than that. They're told they are. It's not just because they choose to believe they are, they're told they are. It's powerful. So if you haven't signed up yet to the website, please do sign up to the website. The limit, by the way, is 500. So once I get to 500, I can't have any more on the website. We're at 415, so there's 85 left. And then I'll start deleting people who have got fake profiles or have don't subscribe to the web, don't open stuff and whatnot. So I'll start deleting people. I can't to jump from 500 to the next tier costs me more money than I've got. So I can have up to the starter package I'm on. So I can have up to 500. So if you've not signed up yet, please do sign up. If you've not liked the transmissions, please like, share. Who watched a council meeting? Who watched the council meeting? Yeah, that's it. That's how much I earn a week. £100 a week. The website is recusant9.ghost.io. The link's always on all the Facebook posts, but it's recusant9.ghost.io. So, they do the mayor making at 3 o'clock or in the afternoon, and then they have the meeting afterwards, and they stop for this slap-up meal. And they invite all the old politicians that you voted out and got rid of as well. So that's what goes on. And they go through the sham of appointing the mayor and nominating and voting through the mayor and the deputy mayor. I already told you who the mayor was beforehand because it had already been agreed, because it's a political appointment these days. Since the days of Jim McMahon, the mayor is a political appointment. But the funniest thing is, Amanda Chadderton stood up and nominated the deputy mayor, and Sheldon, I think, seconded it or something. Or Howard Sykes. And they all went through this sham as though they were voting in and selecting the deputy mayor, Dr. Chauhan. When the week before, Dr. Chauhan had announced his position before the council meeting in Mirpur in Pakistan. He'd already announced in Mirpur, he had a party in Mirpur that made the news in Pakistan, but he was the deputy mayor of Oldham. I don't know, maybe Mirpur supplies a special delivery of postal votes. You'll have to ask Dr. Chauhan. So he got himself elected, nominated, whatever the phrase is, as deputy mayor. And the mayor, Elaine Gary from Failsworth, the last of the Labour Failsworth councillors, stood up, sat down, talked about the cost of living rises, the adversity that people were currently living under. All the big talk. And then voted through a pay rise for herself along with Amanda Chadderton and all the others. Voted through a pay rise for all of them. And at the point of voting through the pay rise, at the time of voting through the pay rise, Brian Hoban, the Failsworth Independent, asked if he'd like to speak. And he spoke well. He made his point. It was missed on most of them, or most of them didn't care. They wanted to be, sign off the pay rises and go home. Because it was buried at the last agenda item 18, I think it was. So Brian gets up and he makes a very valid point. And that point was that seeing as though the Liberal Democrats and the Conservatives are on the same number of councillors and share the opposition, they should also share the money. Because what had been decided were how, by whom, I have no idea. I've not been able to uncover it. Is that once they had the same number of councillors, which started last year, instead of splitting the opposition money, which is what it should happen, the opposition leader would get paid £15,500, give or take. And the deputies about 6 or 7. What should have happened if the on joint numbers is you get 7.5 each. I don't think that's a difficult concept to understand, which was the point Brian was making. They should decide. They should split the money. You have 7.5, he has 7.5. Instead, what was decided in some secret meeting somewhere was that each of them would get the full amount, and you, the council taxpayer, would pay double for the opposition than you would do before. You had done before. So you pay an extra £30,000 or £40,000 in allowances on top of what they already get. So you've got two leader of the opposition parties, each on £15,500 each. 2 deputies, each on 6.5 grand each, and so on and so on and so on. So that was what they didn't want to discuss because, and this is not the norm, by the way. I know many of you come to these transmissions and you listen to me because I do provide you an insight on what should happen. At council meetings, the council staff there are not meant to open their mouths and talk unless they have a function to fulfill. But not for the first time. The backdoor chief executive, Dirty Harry Caffrell, decided he was the one who was going to respond to Brian Hoban's point. And I saw what he did, because I've been in meetings my entire life where people like Dirty Harry do what they do, which is talk a load of rubbish as fast as possible to kick something into the long grass to avoid the issue that has been raised. 1, it wasn't his place to speak. 2, none of what he said made any sense. And 3, we are none the wiser as to who decided that Graham Sheldon and Howard Sykes would be both paid the full amount instead of sharing it. It's because they don't know any better, Lynn. It's because they don't know any better. Do you not remember last year how Brian or Mark Wilkinson would get regularly told off when they tried to speak because it wasn't the place or the time or the process? They weren't following the protocols. Well, neither was Dirty Harry Caffrell. Why did anyone not stop him? Because he is in charge. He was appointed through a dodgy process, and he knows it as much as anyone else does, with a weak council leader who was neck deep in scandal. And he came in and, oh, don't worry, Aruj, we'll go and do these big conversations, we'll get you through. So, he shouldn't have spoken. And you should have been told to shut up. And he was sat down, but shut up. And if you follow these council meetings, and the mayor chairs them, by the way, you will see more and more how she's been whispered in her ear, guided through these meetings, like Jenny Harrison was, like the one before was Ginny Alexander, because they know so many of you now watch them, and you're holding them up to scrutiny in a way that they've never been held to scrutiny before. Probably, Julie. You know, with the lavish lunch, probably. And prior to that, prior to agenda item 18, we had Pam Byrne, the Conservative, by the way, the Conservative Pam Byrne, that many of you voted for, or voted for her party at the very least. I know you did. You're a candidate, weren't you, Lynn? And sorry, Lynn, I'm not picking on you. Your name just come up. She stood up and condemned us all, and how Aruj had been victim of a, some sort of hate campaign. Pam Byrne's constituency includes the village of Diggle. Nicola Hughes, PC Nicola Hughes, the 23-year-old PC Nicola Hughes was from Diggle. She was butchered by Dale Cregan. Dale Cregan's getaway driver was Irish Imi. Irish Imi hangs off the arm of Arud Shah. And yet, Pam Burns' outrage is reserved for me and those who supported me in raising awareness of the links to serious mobsters that the former leader had, rather than speaking out her outrage alongside us. So Pam Byrne is a disgrace. She's dangerous, is what she is. Because Pam Byrne also went and spoke with the Manchester Mill, who have been pushing this narrative that we're a bunch of racist and far-right activists that took out Arud Shah. And along with Pam Byrne, named, because he's that stupid, was Max Woodvine. Now, you've got to understand something about the Manchester Mill. In their offices, they have pictures of iconic historical moments that they celebrate. Do you know one of the newspaper headlines from iconic things that significance to them? Things that make them go, yeah. Do you know what silk pyjama wearing Josh's framed headline, one of his framed headlines behind his chair, is like, he's got this nice leather chair, is he celebrates the day Margaret Thatcher was ousted from power. Now, I'm not a Margaret Thatcher fan, but I'd like to think, I think Pam Byrne is. The Conservatives, after all. Max Woodvine is. So they're happy to work in partnership with Labour Party stooges to attack decent townsfolk who did nothing other than what they should have done. And you know what that is? We stood up for our town. Like I've said, Lynn, is stupid enough to want John Platt's statue back in Dobb Cross, even though John Platt is the bloke who, to all extents and purposes, created Oldham. And him and his peers gave people work during the cotton famine, through which Alexander Park was built, which is hence why his statue is there. The story should actually be why his statue is there, and the story I shared with you earlier. But they won't do that, because it portrays all of you people and your ancestors in a positive way. Apparently, she was always glamorous. I find that a misogynistic term. If you use the context of the places these people come from in terms of objectifying people, is seen as misogyny. Then making reference to someone as glamorous is misogyny. So there was Max and Pam Byrne. Sheldon, by the way, £15,000 a year on top of his £10,000 a year. So Sheldon's on a tidy earner. My sources in the Conservative Party tell me he does not host any meetings. The party do not meet, the group do not meet, blah, blah, blah. Just takes the money. I doubt he even reads the paperwork. Howard Sykes got up and defended Arooj Shah and how she was a victim of a hateful campaign, blah, blah, blah. It's the same Howard Sykes who was caught red-handed leaking personal details of a member of the public to Neil Wilby. The Standards Committee, he referred himself to the Standards Committee. The Standards Committee is like the Police Complaints Authority or the Press Complaints Committee or whatever it's called. Their purpose isn't to investigate. Their purpose is to protect the members that have done wrong. So obviously nothing has come of Howard Sykes breaching data protection rules, laws, and leaking information to an individual whose purpose was, and he knew full well, to harass and intimidate. Meanwhile, we delivered leaflets raising awareness of the mobster links of the leader of the council. But the best one was Barrelgate Bashful. Barrelgate Bashful. He was spectacular. They called us pedos. They called us pedos. And some blokes apparently opened the window driving past and called him a pedo. I've never called him a pedo. I have no need to call him a pedo. Called him a bootlegger and a bribe taker, and I've told him to take his pick because he's self-confessed on both. Well, he's self-confessed on the bootlegging. And I'd like to see anyone look at leaving with a barrel of beer from a restaurant as anything other than a bribe. Stephen Bashful. You know when they called you a pedo? Where you stood outside of school at the time? Because that's how desperate you lot were over the elections, weren't you? You were hanging outside school gates. Sorry, mate. If I saw you stood outside my daughter's school gate, I wouldn't just call you a pedo. I'd come and confront you and want to know what you're doing. Particularly when you've not got your shirt tucked in and your pants are hanging out, not fitting you quite well. Probably got your zipper undone. I'd want to know what you're doing. What a scruffy man like you was doing hanging outside of school gates. Clearly, you're not a parent then. So were you outside of school gates when you were called a pedo? Because if you were, you deserve it. Barrelgate Bashful should have stood up and made reference to why the CSE report is late. Why? Because the CSE report is late. The trust, and repeatedly delayed after we forced it to happen, is why people have lost all trust in their politicians, in those that lead this town. Stephen, that's not of my doing. That's the doing of you, your wife, and all the other councillors in that chamber. You voted both times to block calls for the government to come in and investigate. And you're outraged at being called a pedo. Well, guess what, mate? I would stand in the street and be called a pedo 1,000,000 times if it meant one child of our town had been protected from being groomed and gang raped. That's what you should be outraged at, you knob. You should be outraged at the hundreds of children, thousands probably, from this town over decades that have been groomed and gang raped on your watch. Whilst you were either ignorant or ignored it or were complicit in it for votes. You take your pick, mate. But that's what you should be outraged at. Not because some bloke wound his window down and shouted pedo at you. Knob. There's a funny game going on, darling. He's desperately trying to engage with Amanda Chadderton on Twitter. And Amanda's not engaging with him or not responding to him in the way he wants. I hope she does. Gives me more. Gives you more. Gives us more. I think she's bright, actually. You know, to give her credit. Oh, I started off by giving her credit and thinking she was brighter than Sean Fielding and Arucha, but actually her actions have demonstrated she's probably worse. So when she voted through this pay rise, I called it out on Friday afternoon and many of you criticised it. And to give them their due, so far my understanding is Lewis Quigg, independently by the way, his actions were preceded anything I said or did. Lewis Quigg refused a pay rise. Robert Barnes refused a pay rise. Dave Arnott and Beth Sharp have all refused a pay rise. So all four of the Oldham Conservatives have refused a pay rise. Unprecedented. Mark Wilkinson, I understand, has refused it or is donating it to charity. And the same with Montaz. So far 6 of the councillors that I'm aware of, and there's probably more. Not in the Labour Party. But this is the naivety, arrogance, stupidity, I don't know, pick your word, of the new leader, Amanda Chadderton. People like Amanda Chadderton hold you in contempt. It oozes from them. You'll see. In the meetings to follow, you'll see. Mark my words, you'll see. Amanda Chadderton claims in a post she put on her Facebook, I think. Amanda Chadderton claims that the pay is set by an independent panel. The pay rise. So what? You didn't have to take it, did you? You could have voted against it and said no. There aren't many things a councillor can do to show empathy and alignment with those who are most adversely affected in society by the cost of living rise and all of the challenges we currently face. But one thing they can do, because we know they're better off. I don't envy her earning £45,000, £50,000 as a leader of the council on top of whatever she gets in a full-time job. I don't envy her at all. I don't envy any of them. But what they could have done and what they should have done, and it is symbolic, but symbolism matters. At a time such as this, to show she is in tune with all of us in the town, she should have and could have stood up and said, I can't take this pay rise. Give or take, it's £1,000, but I can't take it. Put it towards the food bank. And I call on every other councillor here to do the same. What sort of message would that have sent out? We are with you. We stand by you. It would have been a demonstration of leadership of the highest caliber. Instead, she tries to trick you by saying the pay is set by an independent panel. The pay might be set by an independent panel, but that does not mean you had to take it. Do you see? Just because the pay is set by an independent panel does not mean you had to take the pay. Now, apparently she's then said it's not good practice. See, this is public sector bullshit talk. Good practice. Who decides what good practice is? What is good practice? She claims everyone else voted for the pay rise. Since when was that leadership? The regular slap I'd get across the back of my head would usually be preceded or followed by, just because someone else did it didn't mean you have to go and do it as well. That's not leadership. And then using that as a defense is worse. Amanda Chadderton first served under Jim McMahon when he was leader of Oldham Council. At the time, Jim McMahon was the highest paid council leader. Predating Jim McMahon coming along. And it's good practice. Nonsense. I know of the Labour Party. I know former Labour Party councillors who refused a pay rise. There is a precedent. They could have got up, she could have got up, and she should have said no. And all the others should have got up and should have said no, and they all should have donated it to the food bank or youth services or something. Instead, not only did they take the pay rise, they hid it at agenda item 18 right at the end. And the newspapers that reported, line by line, agenda item by agenda item, whilst setting out and detailing Amanda Chadderton's priorities as council leader, and I'll get to one of those in a minute, omitted that they'd awarded themselves a pay rise. It stinks. At every level it stinks, and her response, her reaction, actually is some of the weakest form of leadership I've ever seen. It's childish. Good evening, Garrett. And put your name up there, same as Lynn's, because I hear you and Lynn are in trouble for... no, you're not in trouble, but you know what I mean. You've been reported for knowing me. Before the elections took place, pair of you knew me. So apparently it's a crime to know Raja Mir. So much so that Debbie Abrahams has raised it to the Prime Minister in Parliament. Amanda Chadderton One of her priorities is this thing she makes reference to as a resident-focused council. Is that the term she used? A resident-focused council? And as a means of demonstrating how she'll be a resident-focused council, she's increased public questions from 15 minutes to 30 minutes. Well, you all do realise that your questions are vetted beforehand and that council officers prepared responses for the councillors. And more often than not, they don't even answer the questions you've submitted. So if it's going to be a resident-focused council, surely that has to change. It won't, because you're a bunch of thick working class oiks as far as they're concerned. To be manipulated, wrapped around their little fingers and done with as they please because you're thick. And because you're thick, you didn't realise why the Liberal Democrats voted against it. Because the Liberal Democrats, by the way, voted against this. Go and have a look at the vote. And you'll see the Liberal Democrats voted against it. Do you know why they voted against it? We accept the Liberal Democrats, and I don't like Howard Sykes. I'm not a Sama Al-Hamdani fan. But we accept they run an efficient team, not like Sheldon's dodgy Conservatives. You probably don't even read the paperwork. I doubt Max Woodvine reads any of that, what's got to him. Can you see Pam Byrne reading all the papers that go out? Too busy looking glamorous. Go on. I'll have a slurp on my Vimto. If you haven't liked, if you haven't shared, please like and share. Subscribe to the webpage. Buy me a coffee. Buy me a samosa. Do you know why? They've increased from 15 to 30. Why the Lib Dems would oppose that? Yippee, someone signed up. £3. I don't know who it is, but thank you. £3 a month and my number's gone up by 1. Wow. Brilliant. Honestly, to me, it matters. Oh, Gary's here. Gary, are you any good with your spanners, mate? Can you do any plumbing? If you can, by all means, come round tomorrow and I'll make you a cup of coffee. And you can try and work out what I've done to my boiler. You don't know, do you? It's not a criticism of you guys, by the way. Why should you know? It's for those in positions of responsibility to inform you of the consequences of the decisions that they make. The Lib Dems objected, and this is my understanding from trying to read between the small print. You know, read the small print and between the lines of the paperwork I'm entitled to see as a member of the public. From what I can gather, the Lib Dems objected because that 15 minutes was took off something else. It wasn't taken off that bit where they do those grandstanding motions, you know, where they write a letter to the government complaining about this or that no one will read. But you've seen them, you know, where they stand up and scream and shout at the Conservative government and scream and shout some more. No, it wasn't taken off that. That 15 minutes was taken off scrutiny of council, particularly in terms of the committees it sits on, to do with the Greater Manchester Combined Authority, the external bodies it sits on. So where before they could question the council on the clean air zone, where before they could question the council on Andy Burnham's structural framework or whatever it was called, building on the green belt, they've took away the scrutiny of decision making by Amanda Chaddison's council in those groups. That's what they've done. Staggering, isn't it? And yet she's spun it as a resident focus council. It's actually made them less accountable. Because at least the Tories are crap, so forget them. Sheldon and his team were crap. But the Liberal Democrats did hold them to account, and now they can't hold them to account in the same way. So next time someone builds on a green field near you in Royton, or reintroduces the clean air zone, it's all right. We're a resident focus council. It's a joke, isn't it? They take you for fools. They take you for fools. Anything else from anyone else? That was a council meeting. I didn't watch it. Someone sent me the link afterwards, and I watched the link afterwards. I've got something else. It is important. Just before council closed, there was a bloke called Frank Rothwell who was made a freeman of the borough. Yeah, businessman Frank Rothwell owns at Hollingwood Cabins. I don't know how much the council pay him. I'm sure they have contracts with him. And he's got land in Hollingwood. That, you can imagine. Freeman of the borough, status position, dignitary. And I'm sure Frank's done loads of other things for charity, irrespective of his ill-advised flat cap Frank wearing desperation of trying to keep our Rouge in power and funding a series of leaflets that they sent, the Labour Party distributed. The Labour Party distributed his leaflets, by the way. Irrespective of that, he was made a freeman of the borough. Now, I think actually political interference, once you become a freeman of the borough, you're no longer you're meant to be above all of these matters. You're not meant to get yourself involved in politics in that way. Now, there is, and I stay away from these things on purpose because I don't, we occupy a dangerous space. And we occupy a space that isn't popular. And I don't care, it's not popular. And we don't get it right all the time. Because we are going into those dark places they don't want us to go into. So I rarely do this sort of stuff, but I feel compelled to. There's a young man who has been awarded a British Empire Medal. Ibrahim is called. He's not well. And that's the other thing. It's not for me to say why he's not well. It's his own story, and I'm sure. But Ibrahim Yusuf is called. He's 16 now. I think it was about 13 or 14 when he was awarded the British Empire Medal. And the ceremony was delayed until now, and it took place in Maggie's a couple of days ago. And he does nothing but charity work. This is a lad who epitomises everything we should be. I'll bring a picture up. Let me just, so you can see it. That's him there. He epitomises everything this town should be. "16 is not well." Follow him on Twitter. I retweeted something he put up earlier. I don't know if he's on Facebook, so my apologies if you are Ibrahim. But you know what I think Ibrahim should happen to Ibrahim? The council should make him a freeman of the borough. Why have your political stooges rewarded in that way? This young man epitomises everything that is positive and everything that the future of this town should be. He works across communities and on issues and causes that affect all of us. I hope you go and find Ibrahim, support his fundraising. I'm going to host an event at some point at the Milan. I think Milan, Grand Milan, whatever it's called. We'll put the proceeds towards one of Ibrahim's charities. I'd like all of you to join me, or as many of you who can to join me. I've never met Ibrahim, by the way. But I can see a good lad when I come across one. He should be made a freeman of the borough. The lad's not well. He's dedicated his young life, despite all of the challenges he has, for the betterment of others. This is what leadership is. For those of you who've spent the evening with me mocking what others, like Commander Chadderton and the others have done, if they want a lesson in leadership, they just need to look at this young man, 16 years old. This is what leadership is. And it starts by sacrificing yourself for the betterment of others. So please, support Ibrahim, if you can. I'll do a few questions. Feels like it has been a while, hasn't it, since we've been on a Sunday night. I think so, don't you, Tracy? Ibrahim's surname? Yusuf, I think. I'll spell it for you. Just give me a second. Yousaf. The lad's not well, Lynn. I'm not sure how many more seasons he has with us. But he should be given, awarded the status of freeman of the town. Have you been... I have got quite a bit of content out over the last few weeks, I think. Have you guys been reading the newsletters? Are you subscribed? I mean, I like my rhymes, do you? Don't be alarmed. This is just Oldham Council's version of Animal Farm. I can't help myself. Abraham's calls for intervention. I mean, that was hilarious. That was absolutely hilarious. I've got one for Bashful, by the way. Barrelgate. Steve. I'm not a pedo. I'm thinking of a screen grab of Stephen Bashful looking outraged with maybe his zip on his pants half undone. Sorry, it's just an image I've got of him, of his pants not quite fitting properly and the scruffy shirt that's not quite ironed proper. You know, I've got this... I'm not a pedo, but I may be a bribe taker, and I'm definitely a bootlegger. Post them. What do you reckon, Steve? Post it throughout South Chadderton. Picture of you and your wife, because you're both up, aren't you, with Amanda Chadderton? Not South Chadderton, yes, right in South. It's the other way around, Teresa. It's not the title that enables him to do anything. It's a sign of respect and honour and tribute from us to him. That he's loved, he's valued, and we hold him in high esteem. So it's not. I can't say that, but I can say it in a different. Steve's not a pedo, but for the rest, you'll have to wait to see. Though you've got it. He sent me a lovely one of Max Woodbine looking like Dracula, dressed in a Dracula outfit. I'm saving it for a rainy day, because that boy won't be able to help himself. Max! Max Woodbine. Yes, Sally, we've done the wage rises. Max Woodbine, who is appalled at people interacting with me. Max, is it true that in your capacity as counsellor for Saddleworth, you met with the convicted paedophile Mike Buckley? Are you denying that, Max Woodbine? Are you denying your links with the convicted paedophile, Max? What were you doing with him, Max? My information is you met with him. I'd love it not to be true, and for you to categorically deny that you did not meet with the convicted paedophile former councillor Buckley. Graham Sheldon, leader of the Conservatives. Do you approve? If this was to take place, is this not a suspension matter? And the next bit. I'll keep chatting for you. The next bit. Have you seen Amanda Chadderton repeatedly go around the houses regarding her residential status? They talked about it. You're best with just watching and catch up, Sally, in a bit. Is that something else you've noticed about Barrelgate? Ali Akbar, I want dirty fingernails as well. As well as that scruffy stubble of he needs a shave and he hasn't done. What is he? What's his profession, by the way? Apart from, home brewing alcohol. No sale or return. Amanda Chadderton is constantly skirting around her residential status. I'm Oldham, born and bred. I'm raising my daughter in Oldham. None of those are the questions I've asked. Amanda Chadderton's partner is a woman called Rosa Battle. Rosa Battle, until this year, was a senior councillor in Manchester and had been for a while. Her father was a councillor, Jim Battle. Rosa Battle and Amanda Chadderton are partners. They moved in together in 2019 in a house in Chadderton, 2019, 2020, something like that. They moved in together. Her declarations that are now covered up, but prior to that, her residential status, and people in Royton will tell you, they know. She claimed she lived in Royton. I find it very difficult to believe that a grown woman who's now partnered and has a child during her period of courtship, so we say, in her 20s, late 20s, 30s, still lived at home with her parents. My information, and if I'm wrong, I will apologise unreservedly. My information is Amanda Chadderton, for a period at least, lived outside of Oldham whilst she was a councillor. And that matters because it would have made her ineligible to be a councillor. You've either got to live or work or own land in the town you represent. So she runs round avoiding the issue, but the simple fact is, it's a simple question. Now, if you want Amanda Chadderton, I know you and your minions watch this, we'll pack out the council chamber and we'll keep shouting the question. If you want, I can phone up my friends in Manchester, and you know I have them, in the Labour Party as well. And go and knock on people's doors where, at the very least, Rosa Battle was living, to determine whether you were living there as well. So come on, Amanda. Have you been whiter than white, and have you told the truth that you, throughout the 10 years plus you've been a councillor, you lived in the address you're registered with? Because if you didn't, you shouldn't have been a councillor. No, Teresa. No concern of mine. No concern of mine. I have many friends, Teresa. You see, there are things I'll criticise, and there are things it's no concern of mine, and actually I'll defend them. I have friends of mine, in fact, he's probably in his 20s now. A young man I know. He has two mothers. No concern of mine. He grew up in a loving family, and I'm quite happy to know both of his parents and to be considered family. So, no. See, there are things... We're all on a journey, and the world has changed. And it's always change. But if we're going to stay focused on what we want to achieve, and I think it's important what we are trying to achieve together, which is a better town for all of us people. We've got to become everything we hope. Everything that we hope to see in the world. And I'm quite comfortable with 2 women, 2 men. Makes no difference to me. What I'm struggling with, because conversations like that allow us to be exploited and attacked. And then it takes away credibility of the points and the issues that we're concerned about. And they've not been able to do this for the 3 years they've desperately tried. They've not been able to do this. They've shouted and screamed racism, misogyny, all that. No one believes them because they can't back it up. Because we're not from that place. And those of us who might have some of those tendencies, I'm grateful that you've trusted yourself with me and we've been on a journey together. And we're still on that journey. So, and this point matters because at its heart is something about honesty and integrity vis-a-vis the person who leads this town. Were you residing in Oldham throughout the time you were a councillor? It's a simple yes or a no. Not where you had your child, not where your child is going to be raised. Not where you were born. Are we to believe that Rosa Battle lived in Manchester and you lived in Oldham before you both moved in together? Is that the story you're telling us, Amanda Chaliton? She doesn't handle it very well, Lynn. An independent panel awarded my pay rise. It's bad practice for us not to take it. I don't know why it was hidden at agenda item 18. And I don't know why the newspapers that the council, did they fund them? Didn't mention it. But I will scream Arood Shah was the victim of racism and misogyny even though I've not ever presented a single shred of evidence. If you haven't, please like, please share, please subscribe to the webpage, maybe buy me a coffee. I'd like to do these more often. Unfortunately, I simply can't afford to do them more often. I'm at £100 a week. And I have to go and earn my pennies elsewhere as well. No. It's bad in many places, mate. But Oldham is particularly worse. It's unprecedented. The brazen level of corruption in this town is unprecedented. I don't know of any other town with a former leader of the council openly hung off the arm of a convicted heroin dealer. And calling that out as wrong makes me the racist and the misogynist. I'm looking forward to seeing who the team of councillors, the team of candidates the Conservatives put forward in Royton South this year, Julie. I'm really looking forward to it. A very, very, very good night, particularly to my friends in the Labour Party. What did I tell you? What did I tell you?
Do not fear them. Do not fear any of them.